أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So Mustafa give you an overview of the origin of differentiation between human beings in general and gender in particular within Islamic rulings, and he stretched on the fact that equality is the basis in Islam, and actually differentiation is only in case equality can lead to injustice. So at the end of the day, the objective is justice, and so that was the first part of the talk, and I go on with the second part, which is the attitude of classical scholarship toward gender differentiation in revealed text. We have to understand that the classical scholars were living within the boundaries of a historical reality, and that Islam came as a revelation in order to free humanity from everything that was not ethical, from everything that was holding the human from being who he is as a human being. And this was a great this revelation was able to a great extent to realize that task, because actually revelation came in order for the human being, to give him the ways for the human being, to do this, to perform this mission. And from the Prophet ﷺ until the Sahaba and the great scholars in the beginning of the Islamic history and beyond, the scholars were able to a great extent to change the reality of things, change things that were going against ethics and going against humanity of human from the Islamic principles, on the basis of the Islamic principles. But in other in a lot of cases, they managed to do that. But in other cases, actually the weight of the reality was stronger than the efforts that were put in order to change things from the Islamic principles. And this is why, for instance, Malik bin Nabi, he says about the Islamic historical political reality throughout history, he says it is not the Islamic principles about history that shaped the Islamic political thought, but it's the Islamic political reality that shaped the Islamic principles around politics. So it's the other way around. The political reality was stronger than the efforts that were done from the Islamic principles, to change the political reality. So it's the other way around. It's the reality that has shaped the thought, and not the thought from the Islamic principles that has shaped the political reality. And this is true for other things. For instance, Islam came with a kind of pedagogy, with a kind of liberation process to free human being from slavery. We see that in the Islamic principles, freeing slavery, it's almost one of the freeing human from slavery is almost one of the main issues for which Islam came. In the very beginning of Revelation, we can read in the Meccan Revelation, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةِ فَكُّ رَقَبَةِ. What do you know about the obstacle? The obstacle towards the way to Allah. And the Quran cites as one of the main obstacles towards the way of Allah, فَكُّ رَقَبَةِ, is to free the slaves. So, and we see this all over the principles. Islam is the first religion who had made of freeing slaves a worship. It became a ibadah. It became something that will expie sin. expie mistake, it becomes something it's part of zakat. We are allowed to give zakat to free slaves, etc., etc. All the set of principles that were established in order to gradually change the reality. Because of course, Islam is a realistic religion, and it would not be able, to change things overnight. So there is a set of principles. There is an approach, a gradual approach that came with a kind of pedagogy in order to gradually get out of this reality. But this was not, it did not continue after Revelation, and the global reality of slavery was, heavier than the efforts that were done by scholars to follow this pedagogy and to get rid of slavery, because once again the global reality was heavier. And this is the case also for gender issues. Islam came with a whole set of principles to free women from the global patriarchal reality in which the woman was, on the level of the conception of woman, of who woman is, ontologically. She was conceived as an inferior being, in some traditions as a being that is not even human, etc. From a practical and social perspective also, she was often dismissed from society, dismissed from any role to play, so from conceptual and practical perspective, the global reality was that the human, there was a patriarchal reality that was actually looking down at women and misprizing women. And Islam came within this global reality also with a liberation process in order to free women from this reality. And once again, what we said about politics, what we said about slavery, what we can say also about the question of minority and other questions, we can say it also about women, the question of women. The global reality, the weight of the reality was heavier than the efforts that were done or that by scholars to follow this process with which revelation came to free women, and it did not come to the results of the objectives that were settled by the revelation to free women. And actually, we can say once again what Ben Ibn Abi said about politics. It's the opposite that happened. It's not the Islamic thought on gender that is built on the Islamic principles on man and woman and gender, but it's the opposite. It's the Islamic thought and Islamic principles of gender that was shaped out of the patriarchal reality, actually, that was dominating the Arab society and dominating more or less globally. So Islamic thought on women often came out of this, and the texts were used to project this. And so the texts were the reading of the text was more often, when it comes to the question, the issue of woman, was often a projection of the reality than an attempt to try to read what the text is saying about gender reality. And often we will see it. Even the classical methodology often was put aside because there was no need to use the methodology for reading gender issues, because there is this projection that is made on the text, and that we will take some things for granted, so we don't need any methodology to be applied, because some things are just taken for granted as a projection that is made on the text. So this we can see all over the issues that are related to man, to the question of woman, whether it is the ontological conception of woman, who woman is, what her role is in existence, what her function is in society, what her function is within the family, etc. All of these issues were often, within the Islamic tradition, generally looked at from this perspective, from the perspective of a projection of what was already prevailing in this patriarchal reality. So here we can give a few examples. One of the most one of the most speaking examples is maybe that of Fakhr al-Razi, who died 606. When in his tafsir of the Quran, when he is explaining the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, of his signs is that he created for you from yourself mates that you may find tranquility in them, and he placed between you affection and mercy. Indeed, in that are signs for people who give thought. So Razi, explaining this verse, he says, the phrase "he created for you" is evidence that women were created in the same way animals and plants and other useful things were created. It echoes the verse, "It is he who created for you all of that which is on the earth." Therefore, women were not created for worship and religious responsibility. Rather, their creation is God's blessing upon us men. The fact that God has created them for us and given them religious responsibility is to complete his blessings upon us, so the men. Hence, in no way God gave them the responsibility like he gave it to us. And then he continues saying, the above facts are established by revelation, legal status, and common sense. So this is what he said about the fact that woman is created for man as animals and other things were created, and that actually they don't have they don't have the same religious responsibility as men because they were not created for worshiping God. He says this can be proven by revelation, by legal status, and by common sense. As for revelation, he says, there is this verse and others. So this verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, from his signs he created for you and from you mates. So those mates are for Fakhr al-Razi, and of course for most classical scholars, are wives or are female that is created for man. As for the legal status, we see that women are not charged with many of the religious responsibility assigned to man. So the second proof for Fakhr al-Razi that established that women were only the only purpose of woman, the only purpose of the creation of woman is to serve man as animals created. The second proof of this is the legal status, which means the rulings of Islam, the halal and the haram, and the religious obligations. He sees that women are charged with many of the religious responsibility, are not charged with many of the religious responsibility assigned to man. For instance, they will argue, and this is an argument that we can find across the tafsir. They will argue that man goes to Jum'ah and woman not. Man goes to the prayer, to the mosque for common prayer, and woman not. Man goes to jihad and woman does not go to jihad. Man is allowed to be a lawyer and allowed to be imam, and woman not, etc., etc. A whole set. So we can see that they use the gender differentiation that are in some rulings to as a proof that woman is inferior to man. In any way, in any case, this gender differentiation in some ruling is a proof that woman is inferior, and actually they even go further by amplifying the gender differentiation, as we will see later. They will amplify the gender differentiation to make their scope ways bigger than they actually are often. As for common sense, so the third proof that for Fakhr al-Razi that proves that that woman was created for man as animals and other things is common sense. So common sense, things that are obvious and we don't need to prove actually. This is common sense. Things that everybody knows and that is known to everybody. And he says, as for common sense, women are physically and mentally weak like children. Children were not given religious responsibility. It would thus have been appropriate not to give it to women as well. Yet their benefit to us could only be perfect by including them in the obedience to the injunctions, so that each of them fears the punishment, submit to her husband, and stays away from sin. Otherwise, moral corruption will prevail. So this argument is to say that everybody knows that woman is physically and intellectually inferior to man as children are, but the only reason, this fact is established, but the question is then why we know that children, they are not religiously responsible. Why would women then be religiously responsible? The only reason is actually to benefit man, because if women would not have been charged with prayer and staying away from sin, etc., this would have harmed man. So God perfected his mercy upon man by making women religiously responsible. But actually this is not, the purpose is not for her to worship God, but it's to submit to her husband. So this statement of Fakhr al-Razi, especially for the third point, is showing how actually historically perceptions were projected on the text, because those things are taken for granted. We don't even need to investigate them, and they are used actually to read the text. They are used to read the text. So those are things that are established. Everybody thinks this way. Everybody knows that woman is inferior intellectually. Everybody knows that, and we will see this often coming back in the tafsir and in the fiqh. Everybody knows that, for instance, in the fiqh we will see that some fuqaha will say everybody knows that woman should, that the right of the man is that his wife stays home. So this will not be questioned by everybody, because, for instance, the Hanafi school, they will say that the reason why the man is financially responsible for women, for the Hanafi school, is ihtibas, which means the fact that she is actually she cannot, she is actually in service of her man and cannot do anything else. She is totally, they say it's like a qadi, or it's like anyone who's exerting a profession. For instance, a judge, he has a job and he cannot do anything else in his time. So he should have a salary, because he is dedicated to this job. This is the logic of ihtibas. She is dedicated to her husband, and she cannot do anything else. So she should also get money from her husband. So the counterparty of the nafaqa, the counterparty of the financial responsibility, is the ihtibas according to Ahnaf. And the argument they use to prove this is the fact that it's the husband's right that his woman stays home. And here, what's interesting is that the others who rejected ihtibas as a illah, as a reason why husband is religiously responsible, which are the jumhur, which are the majority of scholars, they rejected this because for them it's not ihtibas, it's al-istimta', it's a sexual pleasure. When rejecting this, they did not challenge this very argument of that husband, his right is that his wife stays home. They did not challenge this. So on one side, the Hanafi did not try to prove their argument, and on the other side, their opponent did not even challenge this argument. Why? Because this is something that is taken for granted, and once again we see how things that are established, conceptions that are established, or customs that are established in the reality, are projected on the texts, and how those texts are how those scholars are reading the text throughout those perceptions. For instance, also, so we have the influence also that is coming from this patriarchal societies, but also from other traditions. We see a lot of Muslim scholars that are also arguing that woman is inferior to man because of the fact that Eve has pushed Adam to eat from the tree. This is something that we find among a lot of scholars. While there is no reference to this in Islamic texts, and this is from the Christian tradition. And we have a lot of scholars that are saying also that woman actually is submitted to man because Eve has been created from the rib of Adam, while there is no single reference to this in the Islamic text. Still, they are using this, to conceive woman as a secondary being, and to conceive woman as an inferior being because sin is something intrinsic to woman, because she is the one who pushed Adam to eat from the tree. So sin is intrinsically present in woman, and this is how a lot of Muslim scholars argue, about the intrinsic evilness of woman. Also, we see that, for instance, in
sorry to interrupt. Is there any reference to this kind of interpretation of the text from scholars?
yes, of course, I have actually. This lecture is based on a book that we have written about the issue, about this very issue. This is a French translation. For those of you who read French, I can give them a copy. I don't have the Arab version with me. This is French. Okay, but yeah, it's full of references. So also in the pre-Islamic society, woman often was conceived as a merchandise which will be inherited by the husband's son when the husband dies. This was something that was common in the Jahiliyyah society. Of course, it did not continue with Islam, but what we have in Islam in the fiqh, for instance, is that also woman is conceived as a merchandise within within marriage, because marriage is conceived as all the scholars except of Ibn Hazm, they build marriage and even divorce they did analogy with al-buyu'a, with financial transactions. So where woman is conceived to be the merchandise, and woman and man is the one who buys. Some say it explicitly, who buys her sexual part with the counterparty, and this is in the definition of marriage. But on this paradigm, a lot of rulings that are related to marriage are constructed. It's not only about the definition; it's a whole construction of rulings on which is based on the conception that the man is buying the woman's sexual part, and here we have a whole construction of rulings. For instance, that if for instance some of them will say if a woman dies, well, the man is not responsible for financing her funerals, because the reason why man should is financially responsible is a sexual pleasure, and here sexual pleasure disappears, so he's not financially responsible anymore because there is no sexual pleasure possible. And this is one example, but like I said, it's a whole construction of so many rulings that are all based on the same logics of sexual pleasure. For instance, if she leaves the house without saying it to him, then he will not be responsible financially anymore. Or if she is sick, for some of them, he will not be financially responsible anymore because sexual pleasure may not be possible anymore, etc., etc. So this is on this basis, the whole fiqh of marriage, or a big part of the fiqh of marriage was built on this conception. this is another example, so to show how this cultural and patriarchal reality was often projected on the text. Of course, we can also cite a lot of falsely attributed hadith to the Prophet were coined that are actually also in disfavor of the woman. For instance, here there's a false hadith that says women are the trick of the devil. Without women, men would have worshipped God as it should be. Don't teach women reading and writing. You cannot ask a man why he beat up his wife. Without women, all men would enter paradise. Those and so many others that have cited here. All of those hadith are falsely attributed to Prophet, but their very existence already proves that there is, a certain reality that is existing and through which, the Islamic discourse is often shaped. And for instance, here this false hadith that says that don't learn women read and write. This you find in the tafsir. You find scholars, a lot of scholars. You find them saying it's better not to learn women reading and writing. You find this in the tafsir, or you find in a lot of tafsirs also where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ. Don't give the light-minded your money. They say the light-minded are children and women. So you find this in different tafsirs. So you see how the texts are read through this lens. So here we can see some presuppositions on which the reading of Revelation was based. For instance, the moral inferiority of women. This is something that is supported by so many scholars, that women actually, they are moral inferior. So which means that they cannot reach the same degree of spirituality and religiosity than men. This is something that you can find throughout the fiqh and throughout the tafsir. And here actually we saw it before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most noble amongst you is the most pious. And so piety is something on which human dignity is based. And Mustafa said it before, it's something that nobody can judge of because it's something that is invisible. But if we say that women are intrinsically less pious than men, then automatically we say that women have less dignity than men. And this is something that was very common also in Islamic tradition. Also the intellectual inferiority of women, this also you can find all over the Islamic literature. And here, on these presuppositions, a lot of discourse and a lot of even rulings is based. For instance, on the intellectual inferiority of women, this is the basis why, for instance, we say that women cannot be a judge, and woman cannot be a political leader, and woman she has the half of testimony of man, etc., etc. A lot of rulings and a lot of conceptions are based on these presuppositions. Woman is a fitna. This is also something that is coming back. And a lot of rulings is based on this. And like I said, this is not challenged. This presupposition is not challenged. So here, a lot of scholars will base on this, that this is why she should avoid going to the mosque for prayer, and she should pray at home. This is why she should not do adhan, or read Quran in a loud voice, or this is why you should even not do tashmit. When somebody sneezes, she should not say rahimahullah, rahimakallah, or this is why she should not even give salam, according to some of them, etc. So this concept of woman is also a illah on which a lot of discourse is based. The woman is a awra also. Awra, which means she is an I don't know how to translate it.
Sexual object?
No, not sexual object. She is something that should be covered. She, yes, she's something that should be hidden. And on this illa, you can find so many rulings also based on the concept of the woman being a awra, or woman is property of man. On this illa also, which was taken for granted, as I said before, for the ahnaf, for instance, and for other scholars, this is taken for granted, and this is why also, woman, the man has the rights on the woman, and so many also discourse is built on all of this, musallamat, all of these presuppositions, in many of the rulings. So we can have some we have some examples of texts that were interpreted throughout this lens. For instance, the existential conception of woman, how woman is conceived. We gave an example of the text of Razi, but we have so many other texts where that are interpreted throughout a lens where we see that the ontological reality of woman is something that is inherently bad, for instance, or inherently inferior. For instance, the text where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. Men are قوامون upon women because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preferred the one on the others. Here, there is, according to what I read, all the mufassirun, maybe I have missed some, but anyhow, I have gone through so many tafsirs, and anyhow, even if there is somebody who I missed who said the opposite, the fact that the main tafsir are saying this, I think it's enough. They are saying that this verse is stating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preferred man upon woman. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gave a superior status to man vis-a-vis woman. So this is a way how this text is read, to establish this presupposition that the existential reality of woman is inferior than that of woman. Or another text where the Prophet ﷺ says that woman is created from a rib, and that the most curved part of the rib is the upper part, and if you try to straighten it, it will break. So when you go back to the shuruh, to the explanations of the hadith, you will find that most of the scholars will say that this means that inherently woman is inclined to unethical behavior, to be unethical. Inherently, she is inclined to al-i'wijaj, with this, which is the how crookedness and unethical behavior. This is you can find I have in the book I cited several shuruh al-hadith. So this is an example of how those texts are seen from the prevailing existential conception of woman. Yes, it's authentic.
You said that the fact that it was created from the rib of Adam is not from
No, there is no reference to this in tradition, but this hadith is not saying that he was created from the rib of Adam. Rashid Rida explains this hadith, and he says that, referring to Mohamed Abdu, he says that the Quran says, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ مِنْ عَجَلٍ. Human being has been created from العجل. It's mean how do you translate this? Hastiness. So does it mean that human being has been created from something, something that is called hastiness? It's just a metaphor, and he's showing that here in the hadith is just a metaphor, and it does not mean that she was created from, because there is no reference to Adam in this hadith, and it does not mean that it's just a metaphor to say that, you know, vis-a-vis man, woman is curved, but the opposite is also true. You know, in the eyes of the man, woman is in the eyes of woman, man is also curved, and this is why in the version of Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ says when you try to straighten it, it will break, and it's the fact that it's break means divorce, which means that if the woman tries to get man tries to get woman to his aspirations as he sees things, then the only way out is divorce. They will never agree, because they are constituted differently, and they have different perceptions of things, different ways to approach things. And if the man tried to submit woman to his way of perceiving things, then the result will be divorce. So he will, if you try to straighten it according to you, then it will break. So but there is no reference in this hadith to Adam or to the. So we see also in the existential function of woman that a lot of scholars has reduced woman to a function that is actually a secondary function vis-a-vis man, to a function within the household, within the, with the children, etc., a function of reproduction often. Also her place in the couple, as we saw before, different scholars have reduced her function within the couple, and has, reduced woman to being a sexual or to providing a sexual benefit and for the money, or for the money she received from man. Also, when we see this in her social function, that often she is excluded from a lot of social functions, and even from going to prayer, because in some schools it's even haram for her to go to prayer, and even haram for her to go to Jum'ah, as some scholar says. And even the common prayer, it's better for her to stay home, while there is no authentic text referring to this. And we see the same thing in her spiritual needs and in her legal rights. We see so many texts that are looked at through this lens that was, dominating, this patriarchal reality and the patriarchal perceptions that were dominating in history.
Just a quick question: how do those schools interpret the hadith
Yeah, they say you cannot prevent her, but in any way it's better for her to stay home.
But how would it be haram for some schools?
Because for some schools it's haram because if the fitna is too big. For instance, if she is too beautiful, or for instance for the Hanafi school, in some cases she cannot go to Jum'ah, and especially if if she is old and ugly, then she can. But if she is young, and then she should not go, according to some of the scholars. Of course, I'm not talking about the majority, but the issue is that the majority of scholars, or maybe all of the scholars except one, and that's Ibn Hazm, they are saying that it's better for her to pray home, while all of those hadith, referred to by Ibn Hibban, they have problems in their chain, so there is a problem in authenticity. But also there is a problem in the fact that those hadith are contradicting other hadith that they are authentic. But still, the majority of scholars, like they were thinking that it's better for her to pray at home than to pray in the mosque.
But, I read one of the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ that if a woman wants to go to the mosque and ask permission from her husband, he should let her go.
Yes, and most of the scholars they said that he's not allowed to prevent her, of course. But all of them, except Ibn Hazm, say that it's better for her to stay home. And today we have this phenomenon. How many mosques do we see women attending the 5 daily prayers? Well, in time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was no prayer where there was no woman. They came to all the prayers, and even the Prophet ﷺ made a door specifically for women. So we see this hadith in our daily reality. We see the presence of this even today, and in most of the mosques, and a lot of mosques you don't have any woman in any prayer except maybe for Jum'ah.
What's the arguments of Ibn Hazm for this?
He said the hadith are weak, and they are contradicting authentic hadith. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying that if somebody goes to the Jama'ah, he will get 27 more hasanat than he praying home. And here there is no gender included in this. There is no reference to gender. And so many other, authentic hadith where there is no reference to gender that are, encouraging people to go to the. And here this is contradicting the fact that women also should stay home, because in that case, man can go to the Jama'ah and get 27 more rewards, while she stays home and she has not the equal opportunity to get this reward. So this is contradicting equality. This is contradicting authentic text that is not referring to gender difference, and this is and also actually the texts in themselves, there is no one that is authentic. But like I said, this is still the reality today is based on those non-authentic texts, because there is no divergence among scholars about this. They all agree. Even Ibn Hibban in his book, he said there is no one single text of those texts saying that women should better pray at home that is lacking critiques on the level of the chain. But then he went on to develop the chapter of women staying at home for it. So he adopted this while saying that there is no single hadith authentic.
So many mosques did not space for women.
Yes. What we argue in this book also, we argue, we base the argument of this on the illah, on the raison d'être of praying in the mosque. And we try to see if this also is present for women. The spiritual need. Does the woman have the same spiritual need than man? Because at the end of the day, it's a spiritual basis for which man should pray in the mosque. And this spiritual basis is mentioned in the Quran. فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَن تُرْفَعَ, etc. So it's a spiritual reason why it's better to pray in the mosque. Now the question, does woman have the same spiritual needs than man? Yes. So preventing woman from something that is actually contributing to who he is as a human being, without any valid obstruction that would obstruct her from going to the mosque. This is something that should be considered. So here we have just only one example. Like I said, this is all over the tafsir. Only one example of al-Baghawi, died 510. He says about the tafsir of the verse that I refer to, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. He says God has favored man over woman by making man more intelligent, more virtuous, and qualified for leadership positions. This is reflected in the weights on man and women's testimonies. There is also preference for men because of their ability to fight and to participate in certain acts of worship, such as Friday prayers and praying in groups. Also, a man can marry up to 4 women, but a woman can only marry 1 man. Only a man can divorce, and man had a larger share in inheritance and restitution for involuntary murder. Above all, only men were prophets. So here we can see that how these gender differentiations are perceived. So actually, the scholars, most of the scholars, they perceive gender differentiations to be in favor of men. This is something that is not even challenged. It's not even something that we should question. Why is there a gender difference in some rulings? This is a favor for man. This is in favor of man, and there is no question about this. Why can a man go? Is a man it's obligatory to go to prayer, or it's he inherited the double of woman, or all of those differences are considered to be differences in favor of man, which prove that man is superior and favored. And this is we can find in other, for example, Ibn Arabi, he's making a list also in the same verse saying why, in which regard man is favored, and he's also enumerating a number of rulings, So once again, what we are saying here is not, we are not blaming the tradition. This is not the issue, because actually this is not, we said it before, this is not something that was specific to the Islamic tradition. And even the Islamic tradition in this regard maybe is more advanced than other tradition in that time, because once again Islam came with the liberation process for women, so came to give women a lot of rights that she did not have in other traditions. And the scholars, of course, they abide in different regards, they abide by the text in those rights that women had. But of course they were a product of their time, and they read the text through the lens that was imposed on them by their time. And if we had been in their place, we would have been also restricted by this restriction of time in which we live in. And we today, of course, we are restricted also by things which we project, which we may also project on the text when reading the text. So the issue here is not to blame the scholars and blame Islamic tradition, but the issue is to understand that the text and that the tradition is not always an objective and neutral reading of revelation, but it can be also affected by historical conceptions, historical projections that are made by the text. So the attitude of contemporary scholarships toward gender differentiations in revealed text. Now the issue is that Dr. Ghaly the other day was referring to the fact that in modern deliberations there were some issues about classical interpretations of the text, for instance, or classical, not even interpretation of the text, or classical principles, rulings, like the ruling of the limit of pregnancy, maximum limit of pregnancy, etc. And we saw how difficult it was to challenge this classical understanding, while we have hard evidence, we have scientific evidence that those rulings were based on weak information or on false information. So we saw how difficult it was to challenge the tradition while having solid scientific proof that goes against it. So here it's even more difficult because challenging the fact that, for instance, woman is inferior than man is something that is more difficult, because it's not per se, the evidence that we have for that is not per se scientific in all regards, and there is a lot of ideology also that enters into play in this, because we have feminist movements that may be perceived by some Muslims as going against Islam, as being ideologically opposed to Islam, having ideological agendas, etc. So here, challenging these classical conceptions and classical discourse of of the scholars will be more difficult, while we saw how difficult it was with other things that were scientifically built, and how many time it takes. So we can imagine how many time it will take to challenge this classical perceptions. So if we look at the landscape of the Islamic discourse, Islamic scholarship, with regard to gender differentiation, with regard to gender in general even, we see that we may be able to categorize it in three different categories. First of all is the defense of classical readings. So this is the traditionalist approach. This is an approach that don't have any issue with the classical readings. Don't have any issue to say that, you know, woman is just inferior to man, and this is what the text is expressing. And that's, you know, the reason why why men should be financially in charge of women is that is the sexual counterpart, etc., etc. So they don't. This approach will not have any problem with the classical discourse. It will just maybe defend it, and may add some arguments to just underbuild it, but it will not challenge it. The second approach is the apologetical discourse. The apologetical approach, which will defend Islam from being a misogynic religion, from being a patriarchal religion, and saying that, you know, Islam respects women. Islam does not have an inferior look on women, but their approach is more a reaction to the West than an retrospection to the tradition. Actually, here the approach is not to go back to tradition and to reread the tradition and to rebuild, to unwave actually everything that has been grift to the text, to make a difference between what is text, what is sacred, what is divine, and what is just an historical construction, what is just cultural. This is not the work that is done here, to go back and to, you know, deconstruct the historical elements, to rebuild the discourse on a proper, authentic Islamic basis. But the discourse is just directed to the West and to try to, you know, to defend Islam and defend it from being patriarchal. And this is why often they will just come with new justifications. So there is no, maybe some parts of the text that were you know, read in a misogynic way, it will be addressed, but there is no comprehensive methodology and comprehensive discourse and comprehensive review of the classical tradition in order to bring about an alternative Islamic discourse on gender. And often we see them coming with even new justifications to underbuild even the classical discourse. And then we have the new form of projections, which is the modernist approach, where the purpose is not, once again, the purpose is not to go back to the text and to develop an Islamic discourse on gender based on the Islamic principles and the Islamic worldview, but the purpose is actually a new form of projection. It's to project the modern conceptions on the text and to adapt actually the text to human rights, to adapt it, you know, to modern feminist discourse, but not to go back to the text, to develop from the text an authentic, you know, approach to gender. And here the tradition will be totally dismissed actually. So it's not only about dismissing maybe the readings that are, or deconstructing the readings that are based on cultural views, but it's to deconstruct everything, even the methodology. Even the classical methodology would be deconstructed to be replaced by a new methodology, actually, and there is no continuation. Actually, there is a disrupt, قطيعة, there is a rupture here between tradition and the new discourse that is developed. There is no continuation. And here, so we have the approach will be built on, alternative methodologies that are related to historicism, pragmatism, new hermeneutics that is built on modern linguistics, etc., etc. So let's take just a quick example of the way one text is read by the three approaches. Just a quick example. For instance, we have a text where the Prophet ﷺ says, and we will see it later maybe. Yeah, this is the one. I have never seen anyone lacking in reason and religion more overpowering to a man of wisdom than you. So he's talking to women. So this hadith is saying that basically that woman is lacking reason and religion. Now, of course, this hadith was not problematic and was not was not discussed in a problematic way as it is today in classical approaches to women issues. And actually, what I forgot to say also, because we talked a lot about the classical approach, and of course some of the approaches like that, one of the Razi is not. This is a Razi who said it, which will not mean that it's shared by all the scholars. But for instance, a Razi, his approach to woman and that she is inferior and she is as an animal, it was not challenged. This was not debated. It did not create any scandal or any controversy. And this is the same for all other issues that we may find shocking today. All of the issues that some of them we have talked about. Well, this did not create any controversy. The fact that the counterparty between man and woman is a sexual one, etc. This did not create any controversy, because once again, this was something that was the scholars viewed those texts within this reality in which they were living, and so it would not create any controversy. The controversy is a modern one. It's today that we were shocked by those readings. So here, this hadith about women lacking intelligence and lacking religion, well, the traditionalist approach, the defense of classical readings, will not have any issue with this hadith, and they will build the discourse upon the fact that woman is lacking religion and lacking intelligence, and this intellectual and religious deficiency would be regarded as something that is intrinsic in woman. So the first approach will not have any problem with this. The second approach, the apologetical approach, will try to find a way to defend Islam by looking at the text. But once again, here the discourse is directed to the West as a reaction. The discourse is not going back to the text in order to reshape the discourse on a rigorous methodological basis, which is trying to develop a discourse from the Islamic principles and from the texts. And here, for instance, I don't think it's needed to mention names. I have 3 names here of scholars who I consider to be of that approach. One of them, he's saying that yes, there is an intrinsic lack of intelligence and lack of religiosity, but this is not general. In some aspects only and not general. For instance, the lack of intelligence is only in mathematics and in financial transactions, but it's not a general one. And it's because actually the woman is more emotional than man. Another famous scholar, he said about this text, the Prophet ﷺ was just joking. And he was not serious, he was just joking with women, saying that you are inferior. Another one, he said, well, her testimony is half of the man, and she will lack intelligence because when she will be with men in order to testify, well, she will be shy. And this situation will create that she will be less, attentive and have less understanding of what is happening. And this is why she is lacking in this situation, she is lacking intelligence. And a lot of those scholars actually, they agreed with this classical approach that man is superior than woman, at least in some regards. For instance, this last scholar, he said that one of the rights of man towards women is to be muhtabasa, it's to be, to stay at home and to be at the service of man. And actually in his book, a big part of his book is just a defense, but with more arguments, with more beautiful arguments towards the West, but it's a defense of the classical readings and not an attempt to go back to the text and to try to build an alternative discourse on, rigorous methodological basis. And then we have, of course, the modernist approach, who don't have any problem with this text also, but because they will just reject it. It's not an issue, because for them, anyhow, all the texts of ahadith that are not, or even for them, all the hadith is not even a valid source, or maybe others will just reject all the hadith that going against their approach. And for the Quran, they will just reduce it to its historical aspect, or to its spirit and not its word, and not its letter, etc. So, the last point towards an alternative approach, theological and methodological contours. So here we can state that actually the alternative approach or alternative scholarship on women in Islam is an alternative scholarship which is not only a reaction to the West, and which goes back to the texts to try to undo it from the cultural projections that are sticking to it, and to try to, with a rigorous methodology and approach, build an alternative discourse on women. This is an approach for the moment that I did not see in any trend, and that did not found. So an approach that will really reread the text, reread the tradition on a solid methodological basis, to try to develop a discourse on women in Islam. This is an approach that is still actually missing in contemporary Islamic scholarship on women.
Where would you fit
It's one of the three that I mentioned in the apologetic discourse, even though we have to recognize that he did a great job. He did a great work, but actually even those from the second category, they were criticized and they were, you know, pointed at. There were, you know, there were controversy around them by the classical scholars because they were seen as modernists. They were seen as, you know, and even here, Abdul Halim Abu Shuqa, he encountered a lot of criticism. Well, actually, what he did in his 4-volume book, I think it's 4.
Three volumes.
No, yeah, he has 4 volumes, but actually, I think each volume has two parts. But what he did is basically, you know, trying to show how Islam came to free women, and he came like with so many texts from Quran and from Bukhari and from Muslim, which prove this. So of course it's a great work that he did, and he was not apologetic in all aspects. And in these aspects where he was saying about women lacking intelligence, etc., he said that, you know, it's an intrinsic deficiency, but it's not on all the levels. So what I mean is that he did not. It's already a great step what he did, but it's not. It's more, you know. Yeah, he brought all of those texts that are demonstrating that, you know, Islam came to liberate women, but it's not and I don't think it's an alternative discourse, because he did not come with a new methodological approach to read those texts within you know.
I guess focus more on the historical participation of the women to show their contribution.
Yes.
The Islamic way that allowed them to get into the society and be productive,
Yes.
rather than being secluded and you know, separated from the society. And
Yes, that's true.
and whatnot.
Yes. So in that sense, you know, an alternative, even though, so we can build upon those works like Abdul Halim Abu Shuqa, even though it's one of the rare actually that did such a work, we can build upon to try to develop an alternative discourse. But this approach actually is not represented, I think, by any of the existing trends today.
How that will probably talk about this issue of women, because when I asked him, he referred me to this book.
To which book? Abdul Halim Abu Shuqa. Yes, I don't think he wrote an individual work on this with this regard. So here we have, in order to develop an alternative approach, I think there are 3 main key entrances that should be taken into account in developing this alternative approach. Of course, we are coming out of centuries, you know, of scholarship, and like I said, it will not happen overnight. So we need to reread a great amount of texts, and we have, but what I want to present here is not, you know, the alternative approach, but maybe some keys in order to be able to develop this approach. First of the keys would be to reading gender differentiation in interferential framework, and here often those texts are read in an isolated way, without placing them in an overall framework, which consists of, you know, the way Islam conceived life and conceives the human being and his function, etc. So those texts are read in an isolated way, in a fragmented way, but not in an overall conception of the human being, of his function, of who he is ontologically, spiritually, etc. So this would be the first point. The second point is the implementation of classical methodology in reading gender differentiation, because often, like I said before, often the text was read and the conclusion were made because they are obvious. They are obvious, and so the classical methodology was not even implemented to read the text, because there was no need to implement the classical methodology, because, for instance, reading the text that sees lack of intelligence, you don't need to implement the classical methodology because it's obvious. the meaning would be obvious, and you will not try to look for the deeper meaning and implement the classical methodology. So the second thing to do would be to re-implement the classical methodology in reading, because this methodology is meant to reduce as much as possible the mistake when going from the absolute divine letter to the human relative understanding. This methodology is there to reduce the error, even though you cannot comply 100% to the divine will, but this methodology is there to reduce the error, and we should re-implement the methodology in reading those texts, because often it was dismissed because the projection was stronger.
Sorry, what do you mean by that methodology exactly?
For instance, usul fiqh, the rules of usul fiqh, and we will give some examples after. And the third key entrance or entrance to re-envisage or to rebuild an Islamic discourse on gender is to update the methodological corpus related to the reading of gender differentiation. Because the methodological corpus, the methodological disciplines we have today need to be updated in order to be efficient in reading, the text of Revelations in a more global and holistic way.
And by reading, you mean interpretation of the text.
Yes, reading and interpreting and understanding. Now what we will do, inshallah, is we will tackle the second and the third issue, and we will leave the first one, which is actually the more important one. We will leave it for the public lecture this evening. So this evening we will talk about how to read gender differentiation in a cosmological perception of a human being, of his function, of his ontological reality, etc., and how this can enable us to develop an alternative discourse on gender in Islam. And now we will just take the second and the third point. But can we take a small break before that?
Unless it's time for topics. Who want to pay topics?
Okay, let's pray and then we will come back after the break. Shukran. أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So the claim that we were trying to make here is that as we see it, there is no real tendency today towards developing an alternative approach on gender in Islam, and we are actually always between those three approaches. And actually, we had a seminar with the center. We had a seminar on gender. It was in 2015, I think, in Oxford University, and actually we could see how this was articulated towards the discussions. We had some representative of what is called the Muslim feminist trend that were with us, and we had some Muslim scholars also, and the discussions were very tensioned, and we could see how actually one would feed upon to the other. For instance, at one point of time, this issue of the fact that woman is being reduced to a merchandise within marriage in classical fiqh was raised by one of those Muslim feminists. And the reply of one of the traditional Muslim scholars, who was a woman from Morocco, was to say that this is not true and Islamic in the fiqh. She was not reduced to that because it's only a matter of definitions. It's only because the scholars needed to have a tangible and measurable element on which they could base their definition of marriage, and that would be sexual pleasure, because you cannot define marriage with something that is not tangible, something that is not measurable, and like love or I don't know what. So that's what was her reply. My reply to her in that setting was to say that I would have accepted this reply if it was only limited to the definition of marriage. But if we look at fiqh, the whole construction or the construction of a lot of principles is based on this definition. It's based on, you know, the fact that the wife is offering a sexual counterpart, and as I said, so many prescriptions, so many rulings in fiqh was developed on this logics. So it cannot be a question of, you know, just definitions and had limits of the definition, etc. And what happened is that during the break, this lady came to me, this Moroccan scholar, and she said, you know, what you're saying, I know it's right, and I know, you know, the fiqh has, you know, has some problems with this regard, but don't tell us to the other. Don't tell us to the feminists, because they would use this as argument. So, you know, you see how, you know, the attitude of one would push the other towards more protectionism around, you know, the tradition, and maybe make that they will less be inclined to re-investigate tradition or criticize, deconstruct some elements from the fiqh, etc. And the other way around also. This attitude will also feed into this, you know, feminist approach, which consists to say that we should deconstruct everything because it's based on patriarchal readings, etc. So we should replace it, and we should come up with a new methodology, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to see how, you know, this polarization maybe is also a reason why we are still, you know, looking for something, an alternative discourse, and why it's also so sensitive to read or to try to criticize some classical understandings and classical fiqh. It's so sensitive because, you know, there is this polarization. So what we will try to do now is to just try to talk about how the implementation of the classical methodology in reading gender differentiation, which actually was also an issue because, like I said, often the classical methodology was not implemented because we will go straight to the answer because we have it already. It's something that is not to be questioned. It's something that is evident, and so often it was not needed to implement the classical methodological tools. Now, as for the modernist approach, they would say that actually even the methodology itself, it's not only about the fiqh or not only about the interpretation or the results, but even the foundation, the methodological foundations and tools themselves are patriarchal in nature. So everything should be not only the results and the readings, but even the methodology should be replaced because it's patriarchal in nature. And here I have an example of one author who is talking about ذكورة الفكر الأصولي, the masculinity of Usuli thought. Usuli, which means methodological, Islamic methodological thought. So he has a whole chapter where he is trying to demonstrate how classical methodology is patriarchal by nature and how it's producing patriarchal readings. Now, the problem of this chapter, when you go through it, you see that there is no one single example of one Usuli methodological feature that he come up with to show that this feature or this methodological instrument is creating patriarchal reading. It's just a set of practical issues, so fiqh issues, that he found in some Usuli books that are maybe patriarchal in nature, maybe sometimes de-appreciating women, but it's not about methodology. This is about fiqh, and the only thing is that he found this in books of usul al-fiqh. Now there is one single ruling that he came up with, trying to say that this is a patriarchal methodological feature that is producing patriarchal readings, and that is the ruling of دخول النساء في خطاب الرجال, or دخول المرأة في الجمع المذكر السالم, which means that is the woman also does the woman enter into the جمع مذكر السالم? It means the plural masculine form. Is the woman also, when the text is addressing the people through a plural masculine form, is this also addressing women? So he said that most of the scholars are saying that woman is not included in this, which means that she is dismissed from the religious discourse, and this is producing patriarchal. This is an example for him for patriarchal reading and for rulings that were invented by scholars that are producing patriarchal views on when reading the text. Now, this is the only example that he could find, and even in this example, we can actually reply by 3 elements that are showing that this is not a valid argument. First of all, those who said that woman does not enter into plural, is not concerned by plural masculine form, are a minority of scholars and not a majority. The majority, they say that woman is also addressed by the plural masculine form. This is the first point. Second point, let's go in this direction and say, okay, all the scholars agree that woman is not entering by the text that addressing plural masculine form. Even though it's not a valid argument, because this is not how usul al-fiqh works. This is not how the methodology works. It's not only with one single rule that you will establish the results and the ahkam. It's a whole set of rulings that can establish ahkam, which means that if woman is not included by one ruling, she can be included by another one. So this is not how it works. For instance, if we have a text where God specifically address man, rajul or rijal, this is clear that it does not include woman, but it can include woman by other means. For instance, we have the mean of الحاق المسكوت بالمنطوق أو الإلحاق بنفي الفارق, which means that this is another methodological feature where, for instance, if God is addressing man on a particular issue, then the question is, is woman also addressed, even if he says specifically rijal, man? Is woman also entering into this ruling or into this khitab, into this discourse or not? There's another ruling that says إلحاق المنطوق بالمفهوم الحاق المسكوت بالمنطوق بنفي الفارق, which means that the one who is not explicitly addressed will be at the same level that the one who is explicitly addressed by نفي الفارق, which means by negating negating the differences. For instance, here we say, is there any difference between man and woman that make that woman is not concerned by this ruling? And if there is no difference that is influencing this ruling, then we will say woman has the same status than man in this regard. So this is another methodological feature that through which woman can be included, even though if we say that the text is specifically addressing man. So this is the second point. And the third point is that he's saying that this is a methodological feature that is producing patriarchal reading, but he did not come up with one single example of a patriarchal reading that is a consequence of this ruling, which shows that actually this argument has no basis, because where are the examples of patriarchal readings resulting from this ruling? There are no examples. So all of this shows that the issue is not in the methodology. The issue is not a methodological issue. And the issue would rather be sometimes a lack of implementation of methodology. If the methodology was implemented, often was implemented as it should be, then we can come to different conclusions. So here we will maybe give some examples about how to re-implement the classical methodological features when reading the texts. And we will take the example of this hadith that we have referred to before. The Prophet ﷺ says, I have never seen anyone lacking in reason and religion more overpowering to a man of wisdom than you. And a woman asked, what is this lacking in our reason and religion? He said, is it not that the testimony of two women is equal than to the testimony of one man? They answered, indeed. He said, this is a lack in your reason. Is it not that a woman does not pray or fast when she has her menses? They answered, indeed. He said, this is a lack in your religion. Now, this hadith was used to say that woman is intellectually and morally inferior to man intrinsically. This is how she is constituted in her fitrah, intrinsically. And on that basis, of course, the discourse also, this is one of the bases on which the discourse around woman was developed, because she is lacking intelligence, she is not able to perform some duties like men would be, like for instance some positions that has to do with leadership, that has to do with social responsibilities. She will not be able to carry them because she does not have the same intellectual capacities, and also maybe some religious responsibility. She will not be able to perform them because she does not have the religious or the moral capacities to do it, etc. And even in terms, not only in terms of prescriptions, but in terms of conceptions, this projection on this text played a role to conceive woman in a certain way.
I have a question here about the use of the translation lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Is that proper translation?
Naqs. How would you translate it? Naqs.
Because lacking here is possibly deficiency, I think. Deficiency rather than lacking.
Deficiency?
Yeah,
I understand the naqs to be lack of something.
no, it's lacking in reason. Let's say
So you would say deficient in reason.
you don't want to go over the definition, but sometimes when you translate the text also in different language, the Arabic language has its own.
Yeah, but it would not change anything. In the classical readings, the scholars, most of the scholars agree that she is inferior intellectually, and she is inferior.
But a Western reader
Yeah.
would read the translation.
Mhm.
But this is an
But I'm even talking about a Muslim reader. He would read it in the same way. He will read it that like I said, in the classical period, and even more, a lot of modern scholars will say that she has a lack in intelligence and she has a lack in religiosity, and then their argument would be to say that because her lack of intelligence is because she's more emotional, she's more, when she is with men, she loses her intellectual capacities. All of those readings exist amongst the Muslim scholars who are reading it in Arabic. So I don't think the main issue here is the translation. And by the way, it's really rare to find. I try to look in the different books that are produced to understand this hadith with going back with a certain methodology and understanding it in a holistic way. It's just a reproduction of classical readings with just justifications that even are difficult to prove. Like I said, justification of emotion and those kind of things. So here we can try to read the text by implementing some classical methodological features that can bring us, to maybe a closer conclusion, a conclusion that is closer to what the text is really saying about, women and their intellectual and religious identity. We can use one of the tools that we can use is a tool of sabr wa taqsim, which is known in usul fiqh, which is a tool where you try to gather all the reasons why a ruling was established, or why the Prophet said something, or why the revelation said something. You try to gather all the possible reasons, and then you test all those possible reasons to come up to one single reason. For instance, sabr wa taqsim, and the reason why alcohol was prohibited would be to take alcohol and all its attributes. It's something that is liquid, it's something that has a certain color, it's something that has a certain smell, and that is tetra, and that is intoxicating. And you take all those attributes and you try to test each attribute to see whether it is relevant to the ruling or it's not relevant. And all the non-relevant attributes would be dismissed until you have only the relevant ones, and you can choose from the ones who is the most relevant, and then on that basis the ruling would be based, and that would be the reason why the ruling was established. Now here we can use the same approach, sabr wa taqsim, to try to know why the Prophet ﷺ is saying that woman lacks intelligence and religion. And here, if you go back to the texts, we can say that Islamic rulings, or rather Islamic texts, not rulings, Islamic texts, or we can say revelation, expose deficiencies or particularities that distinguish people only for certain purpose. So what we can establish already is that there is no text that will talk about differences or particularities or deficiencies between people just for the sake of mentioning that there is this deficiency between people, or that this is the difference between people. There is always a reason why the text evokes a deficiency or a particularity or a difference. And now we can do this exercise of sabr wa taqsim, or trying to enumerate the reasons why the text would do this, would talk about differences or would talk about deficiencies of the ones vis-a-vis the others. And we can here identify 5 reasons why the revelation is doing this, is differentiating between people. First reason, if this particularities or this deficiency results in differentiation in rulings, as is the case with travelers, children, and the insane, as indicated in the verse, there is not upon the weak or upon the ill or upon those who do not find anything to spend any discomfort when they are sincere to Allah and His Messenger. So here, God is enumerating or highlighting differences and deficiencies between people. He's talking about the weak, which is a deficiency vis-a-vis the strong. He's talking about the ill, which is a deficiency vis-a-vis the healthy. He's talking about the poor, which is a deficiency vis-a-vis the rich. And why is he talking about those deficiencies? Well, because there is this difference here in ruling. And the difference is that those people with those deficiencies, they are not obliged to do jihad. They are not obliged to fight with the other Muslims. So here, this is the first case where, or first reason why revelation would highlight deficiencies. A second reason is to remind of Allah's signs in His creation and different favors bestowed upon people. Here it's when the purpose is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds people that of His signs and of His favors. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and of His signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge. So here, the difference is highlighted because in order to remind of God's favor, to say that this is a favor that God has given. So this is the second reason why differences or deficiencies would be highlighted by the text. Third reason is to show that one or the other have more or less, to show that what one or the other have, more or less, is a part of the test of the human being by God. So, to show that what Allah has given the one more than the other is a test. To have more is a responsibility by which the individual is tested on his ability to benefit those who have less. So here, God would highlight the difference or the deficiency to show the responsibility of the one who has more towards the one who has less. For instance, he says, "He who has made you successors upon the earth and has raised some of you above others in degrees, that he may try you through what he has given you." Or another verse, "Had Allah willed, he would have made you one nation united in religion, but he intended to test you in what he has given you. So raise to all that is good. To Allah is your current return altogether, and he will then inform you concerning that over which you used to differ." And another verse, "Men are devoted to women by right of what Allah has given one over the other." Or, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know each other. Indeed the most noble of you is in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed Allah is knowing and acquitting." So here, the favors that Allah has given to ones and not to the others, whether it is financial, whether it is moral, whether it is related to the favors that one tribe has vis-a-vis the others, or one gender has vis-a-vis the other, all of this is highlighted in order to say to the ones that have this favor that he is responsible towards the other that doesn't have it, and Allah will ask him about that. This is a third reason. A fourth reason is if the deficiency is an acquired one due to the person's own actions. Hence, divine statement reproaches him for it, as in this verse about those who rejected the truth and preferred to follow the error, thus losing their capacity for discernment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Deaf, dumb, and blind, so they do not understand." So why is the deficiency here highlighted? Because it is an acquired deficiency. It's due to somebody's actions. And so the revelation is reproaching him that he has behaved in a way that made him deficient vis-a-vis other people. And so it's a reproach vis-a-vis this person who acquired this deficiency by his own mistakes and his own actions. So this is a fourth reason why deficiency would be highlighted by revelation.
Can we go back to the previous slide for moments, please? Thank you.
Here we're using the word deficiency and not lack of. So,
Lack of something can be deficiency vis-a-vis the other one.
but I'm saying the lack is like, may refer to the absence
Mm-hmm. Yes.
of total absence. No?
Mhm.
But the deficiency is a part of what is not there. So the terms are not equally.
Yeah, what I mean here by deficiency, it can be deficiency, it can be a lack, it can be a difference, even just a difference, not even a deficiency or a lack, even just a difference. Because
Terminology.
Sorry, can we go back to the previous one, please? Thank you.
so the fifth reason is if the deficiency or peculiarity that causes this lack needs to be overcome, such as a lack resulting from physical or psychological factors or related to the circumstances of the social environment or other. We must try to overcome this lack or the effect that it generates as it is the case of the Bedouins arise in the Holy Book. The Bedouins are stronger in disbelief and hypocrisy and more likely not to know the limits of what Allah has revealed to His Messenger. So here this deficiency or this particularity or this lack or what or the issues that are caused by this lack needs to be overcome, and this is why the text would highlight it, because this deficiency or its causes need to be overcome. For instance, if it is a lack resulting from physical or psychological factors or related to the social environment or others. So here the lack needs to be overcome, as in the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الأعراب أشد كفرا ونفاقا وأجدر أن لا يعلموا حدود ما أنزل الله على رسوله. So as a lack of the Bedouins here, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlighting that the Bedouins have this deficiency or has this lack vis-a-vis the other people? So which is that they are stronger in disbelief and hypocrisy and more likely not to know the limits of Allah and His Messenger, is because they are Bedouins. And so here is not just to blame them, but it's to say that they should overcome this. This indicates that their social system and style is the main cause behind their tendency to infidelity, hypocrisy, and ignorance. The Bedouins' lifestyle is the cause which should be treated to move them for nomadism, or at least to remedy to the causes of such negative tendencies in Bedouin communities. So this is another reason why the text would highlight the difference, the deficiency or the differences, is to say you should overcome it and you should do something about it. Now, if we come back to the hadith, then we can. Now we have the all potential reasons of why the Prophet ﷺ would say that women lack intelligence and religion. We have the potential reasons, but we should only test one by one those reasons to see if it's about those reasons. Now, the first one, is it about the fact that this is resulting into differentiation? Because the Prophet ﷺ, for instance, said that she's lacking religion and intelligence, and this should result in a differentiation between man and woman. It cannot be the first reason. Why? Because actually this lack in religion is already a result of a differentiation, and it's not that what is causing differentiation. Because lack in religion is a result of what? As in the hadith, is a result of the fact that the woman does not pray when she has her period. So it is not what is creating the differentiation, it's a result of the differentiation. And it is the same thing for lack of reason. It is not creating a differentiation, and the proof that it's not creating a differentiation is in the very hadith. He said, is it not that the testimony of two women is equal to the testimony of one man? They answered, indeed. Which means that this hadith is not coming to create a differentiation. The differentiation was already there, because they said, indeed. How did they know? So the hadith is not coming up with a new ruling. It's just saying something that is already established. Is it clear? So, and they knew it. And where is it established? It's not this hadith that came to establish this ruling. It's the verse, Quranic verse, that already established this ruling. And this is how they said, Bala, indeed. So they knew it already. So it cannot be the first reason. Is it the second reason? To remind of Allah's signs in His creation and different favors upon people? Well, if it was the second reason, it would have been more appropriate to address to men, because the Prophet ﷺ was addressing women only. He was not addressing men. So it had been more appropriate to address men, to say which favor Allah gave them and not the others, than address women to tell them what favor Allah gave somebody else than them. So it's not appropriated. So it's not the second reason. Is it the third reason, to show that what one or the other have more or less is a part of the test? We can say the same thing. if it is to say so that what Allah has given you and not the others, you should be responsible with this and make the other benefit from it. So it would be more appropriated that the Prophet ﷺ would say this to men and not to women, if it was the third reason. Because the third reason is to say that this favor that you have, you should make others benefit from it. And here, it's not appropriate to address women because it's not them who got this favor. Is it the fourth reason? Because the deficiency is an acquired one? No, because here it's not an acquired deficiency, because it's a deficiency that's coming out of the text. Is the text, or is the fact that they are faithful to a ruling which is not to pray during period that is causing this deficiency, and not something that they acquired by themselves. They acquired it by abiding by the revelation, not by their own mistakes. Okay, so it's not the fourth reason also. So we have only the fifth reason left, which is that it is a deficiency that is resulting from physical or psychological factors or related to circumstances or the social environment, which should be overcome. So now is this the reason? We should test this now. We should test if this is the reason. This is a potential reason, because we dismissed the four others. Now this is a potential reason. Is it because this deficiency should be overcome? We should test this. Now, how can we test it? Of course, by first of all going back to the text itself, going back to the hadith itself, because the hadith already is indicating the reason. He's saying, what is the reason of woman lack of intelligence? He said, is it not that the testimony of two women is equal than the testimony of one man? So here is the answer. The answer is, why is woman lacking a religion? Is because her testimony is half of two men. Reason, yeah. Now, to understand why her testimony is the half of that of two men, where should we look? To understand the reason why her testimony is half. So the Prophet himself, he said, here is the reason. So where should we look? We should look in the Quran, because actually the only place where this is mentioned is nowhere else than the Quran. There is no hadith or no other Quranic verse that is indicating that the testimony of woman is a half of the testimony of man. So we should look at one single verse that is talking about this, and the hadith, once again, is not establishing this, is referring to the Quran. So we should go from this hadith to the Quran to understand why. And here the verse is saying, "O who you believe, when you contract a debt for a specified term, write it down and let a scribe write between you on justice." And then it says, "And bring two witnesses from amongst your men. If there are not two men available, then a man and two women from those whom you accept as witness, so that if one of the women errs, then the other can remind her." This is what the verse says. And the reason, first of all, what we can take from this verse is that it's talking about, first point, it's talking about debt, and it's not talking about anything else. While when we go back to the interpretations within tafsir and within the fiqh, we see that scholars have generalized that the testimony of woman should be the half of man in almost everything. And even a lot of scholars would say that she is not allowed to testify only in debts. So here it's the other way around. Normally the verse is talking about only depths, so which means that there is no evidence to say that her testimony should be the half in other things. But a lot of scholars, they say that she is allowed to testify with another woman and a man only in depth, and in the other issues she's not even allowed to testify. So you see how they generalize this issue. And they did not allow her to testify in a lot of things. A lot of scholars, for instance, in criminal cases or other cases, she was not even allowed to testify, even if she was with 100 women. But the verse is only talking about depth. That's the first issue. The second issue, what we can take from the verse, is the verse is only talking about tahammul, and not talking about al-ada. This was highlighted by Ibn al-Qayyim in Turuq al-Hukmiyya, which means that in testimony, we have two types of testimony. We have tahammul, which means to receive the testimony, to testify about something that is happening, and we have al-ada, is to go when the judge is calling you to testify, to go in front of the judge and to deliver your testimony about what you saw happening. This is called al-ada. Now this verse is only talking about tahammul. It's only talking about to carry the testimony, to testify about something that is happening, not to go to the judge. While scholars, most of the scholars, they generalized it to all the types of testimony, whether it is to testify about something or whether it's going to the judge to deliver the testimony. And Ibn al-Qayyim is highlighting this in a remarkable way in his book Turuq al-Hukmiyya. This is the second point. The third point is that the very reason why a woman's testimony is the half of that of the man is clearly mentioned in the Quran, which says, so that if one of the women errs, then the other can remind her. This is the illah, the reason, la raison d'être. This is why God made, in this case, the testimony of woman the half of man, because if one woman errs, it means like she is there, something is happening, a transaction is happening, she errs, she does not understand what happened, then another woman can be there to help her understand, that they can help each other to understand what's happening in order to have a clear idea of what they are testifying about. And here there is a rule in usul al-fiqh. So here we are talking about implementation of classical methodology. The classical methodology is saying الحكم يدور مع العلة وجودا وعدما, which means the ruling depends on the reason, the raison d'être, negatively and positively, which means, for instance, alcohol. Why is alcohol prohibited? That's the ruling. It's because of a reason, and the reason here is intoxication. So that the rule is saying, when the reason is there, the ruling is there. So when intoxication is there, prohibition is there. And when the reason is not there, the ruling is not there. When there is no intoxication, call it alcohol, call it wine, call it whatever you want, the ruling will not be there. It will not be haram because intoxication is not there.
Is it the existence of it or the potential for it? Because then someone could say, I could just have a drink and not become intoxicated.
Yes, but here the hadith says clearly, ما أسكر قليله ما أسكر كثيره فقليله حرام. What is intoxicating in big quantities is prohibited in small quantities. So this is clearly, even though it does not lead to intoxication, or even if you drink small quantities without having intoxication, it's prohibited because it's a way that can lead to intoxication. And here the verse say, أن تضل, if there is a potentiality, a possibility that one will go astray, will err, then the other is there to help her understand. So here the reason is the possibility that she will not understand what's happening because of, she's not aware about financial transactions, etc. And the ruling is, if this possibility is there, the ruling is there, then there should be two women instead of one man. But then this methodological feature will tell us if this possibility is not there, then the ruling is not there also. So if We have a woman that is specialized in financial transaction, and she does not need another woman to help her because she will not err. So this is methodologically speaking, we can say that the testimony of one woman is equal than the testimony of one man if there is no possibility that the woman will err. And this is Ibn Taymiyya is the only one who actually, what I'm saying now is the only one who said it. I did not find anybody else, but I can quote him. He said, فما كان من الشهادات لا يخاف فيه الضلال في العادة لم تكن فيه على نصف الرجل. He says, if there is a testimonial where there is no fear that she will err, usually there is no fear that she will err, لم تكن فيه على نصف الرجل. Then her testimonial is not the half of that of man. So here, when implementing the methodological feature, the verse is clearly, because here we have a illa mansusa. We have a really very clear raison d'être, a very clear reason. Sometimes, there is no even reason that is textually mentioned, and even though the scholars try to deduce the reason in order to build the rulings upon. Here the reason is clearly mentioned, while most of the scholars did not even consider this reason and generalize it so in all the cases her testimony would be the half. And here, so we go back to our fifth element, and this is talking about the deficiency. So here we can say that it's a deficiency due to what? To social circumstance. Why did the Quran say that her testimony is the half of that of man? Because women, at least at that time, usually they were not aware of financial transaction as was the case for men, because they were socially less engaged in those things than men were. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling the women that they were intellectually deficient because they are not, according to the verse, they are not aware of things where men were aware of. So this is the reason here why the Prophet ﷺ said, highlighted this deficiency. So we can relate it to our fifth element, which is the reason is that this deficiency is resulting from a social factor, and thus it should be what? It must be overcome. So actually it's a kind of emancipation. The Prophet ﷺ, he is saying to the woman, do something about it. Overcome this deficiency. And this is the case also for the lack of religion. Because this deficiency is caused by something which is, the fact that in that period they don't pray, which is related to a physical feature, a physical reality. And so they should overcome it by compensating this lack of worship during that period by other means. And this is why in the very hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he came up with other means in the very hadith. When he was saying, tasaddaqna, for instance, he was saying, give charity. And he was saying, remember Allah a lot. So here we have a set of elements that can help women during this period not lose pace with man in terms of spirituality. It's not because they are not praying that their relation with God should be interrupted, because their spiritual need is at the same level than man's spiritual need. So they have a spiritual need even in that period. So that period must not mean an interruption. So they should keep remembering Allah, keep even reading Quran, doing acts of worship in order not to keep pace. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying, do something about it, about this lack, in order not to lose pace, and in order to overcome this reality. Yes, so this is a way, this is just an example of a way how to re-implement classical methodology in understanding the text. And we did not, go very far in interpretation, trying to make, acrobacy to see, that it was not this or that. We just stick to the classical methodology and stick to the text itself and give the reason behind the text itself and show that the text itself is giving alternatives for lack of religion and etc. So this is just an example of that. And I will just, I think, leave it here. Allahu a'lam wa ahkam wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.